Our reading today is Luke 1:58 and 59. And her neighbors and cousins heard how the Lord had showed great mercy upon her, and they rejoiced with her. And it came to pass that on the 8th day they came to circumcise the child, and they called him Zachariah, after the name of his father. Elizabeth propped her newborn on her shoulders and patted his back to the beat of her deep breathing. He was full and fast asleep, with his rhythmic little breasts pulsing against her neck. She closed her eyes and relished the silence. With all the commotion of the past week, an outsider likely thought there had been a wedding at the old couple's house, not a baby. The constant stream of visitors had filed in and out, rejoicing and celebrating. Today she rested, but tomorrow the guests would come again, not only to celebrate, but also to name him. Elizabeth had heard them discussing the name, but she'd been too tired to argue and tell them that the job had already been done. Months ago, Zachariah had been stirring coals in the fire with a stick. He stopped suddenly and clapped his hands to get her attention, and she hurried to his side. Zachariah pointed his smoldering stirring stick into the fire. There in the ash, with the charred end of his stick, Zachariah had written in Hebrew. Now she recognized it as Hebrew lettering, but she had never learned to read it. She looked at the writing and then to Zachariah and shrugged. He retraced the letters, searched her for some kind of trace of understanding, but she gave none. He hung his head and tossed the stick into the dying fire and went to bed. The next morning, a neighbor and her son stopped by and offered to fetch the water. The woman's young son, on his way to synagogue, followed her inside and wandered around the room. While Elizabeth thanked her friend, she noticed the young man studying the charred letters in last night's ash. He quietly drew out the sound, J-A-N. His mother took the jar from Elizabeth and called him to come along, and they were off again. Elizabeth returned to the ash. The black letters were still there. Zacharias sat praying near the window. She knelt, laid a hand on his knee, and opened his eyes. He opened his eyes. On eye level with him, she pointed to the writing and said, "John?" He nodded with a grateful smile and took her face in his hands and kissed her forehead. She gave Zachariah's knee a satisfied squeeze. The baby wiggled on her shoulder as if participating in his infant's dream. "John," she whispered, and he settled. John. She liked it, but she knew the family coming tomorrow would not. Zachariah knew what the child must be called. He was determined to obey God and name the baby John, but it was such an apt name. God was gracious. God was gracious to discipline Zachariah and not let him wallow in his unbelief. God was gracious to remove the reproach of childlessness. God was gracious indeed. O Lord, thank you for somehow providing a way for a mute old man to communicate with his illiterate wife. No plan of yours can be thwarted, and your provision never stops. And thanks for listening. See you tomorrow.